Welcome to a new sort of like mini series I'm doing. This is different than other stuff I've done. I thought it would be good to make this series of videos speaking to subjects or questions that I get regularly. And a lot of this is going to be for new sailors or people just getting in to sailing or interested in cruising. This is mostly geared towards that crowd. So that's what this whole series is going to be about. And I hope you find it useful. And I hope it helps you move forward at chasing your impossible dream. Okay, welcome to episode 2 of this mini-series. This one is called Need versus Want. And we're going to talk about that very subject. What do you need to go cruising versus what you want? That's a very important distinction. And sometimes what we want can stop us from ever leaving. So you need to be able to, if you're very serious about getting out cruising, seeing the world by sail, then you have to sort of like negotiate between those things. So at the core of it all, you really only need 3 things. You need a capable boat, you need a means of navigation, and you need food and water. Now, that is a grand oversimplification, but that's really how you need to look at it. Because that, when it all boils down to it, that is literally all you need. Everything above those things is an add-on. So, and obviously a lot of gear comes in play with the capable boat aspect of that. Now, I've already done a whole episode a couple years ago on what boat do I need. So I'll put the card at the top of the screen right now. You can go, I'm not going to go into all the details of the different types of boats. I've already done that. So go check that video out at another time. And I talk about things to consider with different types of boats versus different types of needs for sailing. I will say that when I was shopping for a boat, I knew that my limited finances were always going to be a factor in what I was going to get. Because you really have to think about long-term upkeep of the boat. It's very important because it never ends. So I was only looking for boats under 30 foot. I wanted boats that were pre-1972 because that was when fiberglass was a new thing and they didn't know how long it was going to last, so they overbuilt all the boats pre-72. I wanted a boat without a core, so Tritea is solid fiberglass, there's no core. That means there's no delamination to ever worry about now or in the future. I wanted an encapsulated keel, which means the keel can't fall off. And I knew that a boat that size I could financially keep up with by working as I went. Whether it be like new rigging or new sails or even the amount of money bottom paint costs. There's a smaller surface area on a small boat versus a massive boat. To slip fees. Slip fees on like a 30-foot boat versus like a 45-foot boat are wildly different. So all of that stuff adds up in the long term. And it's stuff you have to consider when you're shopping for your blue water, kind of take you around the world, or even just long distance cruising. Maybe you're just going to do the South Pacific, maybe you're going to do a Pacific loop, maybe you're just going to sail across the Atlantic instead of like a full circumnavigation. So there's a lot to consider, and a lot of it has to do with like who you are, what your needs are, and what your long-term finances are going to allow you to get. Now, a lot of people will say, well, how big of a boat do I need? That's like kind of an impossible question, because Kenichi Hore sailed from Japan to San Francisco on a 19-foot plywood boat I think he built himself when he was like 23 years old, and I think he capsized 3 times, fully rolled. Luckily, the mast didn't break. He didn't get dismasted, and he just kept sailing. And like Lynn and Larry Party, they circumnavigated in a 24-foot boat, a wooden boat that they had, Larry had built with his own hands, engineless. So, is it possible? Yes. It's also possible to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel. Will it be fun? Not necessarily. My buddy Sam Holmes bought his first boat, like 2 slips from Tritea in Los Angeles Harbor. And I think it was a 21 or a 24-foot Ranger. I can't remember the exact length. But he sailed that to Hawaii. But it's worth noting that he did not sell it back. He sold that boat in Hawaii. So that's something you need to think about. Like, if you're like, well, if I buy a little boat, then I can have more money. Well, your comfort level, your physical comfort on the boat might make it so that the experience turns you off forever to sailing. Where if you had just gotten a realistically sized boat that was capable of ocean sailing, I guess that's the key, is like, is it a blue water boat, or is it outfitted to be a blue water boat? So Tritea is a full kill boat. I was shopping for a 27-foot Triton when I found Tritea. That's also another full kill boat. But there have been Catalina 27s that have circumnavigated. So even that's like a mass production boat. But then on the flip side of that, like, Hunters are very poorly made. So I would never put to sea in a Hunter, where I know that Catalina 27s has circumnavigated. Might not be very comfortable to do it in, but I know that those boats can do it. I met an Argentinian couple in Fiji who sailed on a Catalina 36 from Florida, and now they're in Australia. So there's a whole variety of production boats and affordable boats. You can get those Catalina boats for pretty cheap. And as long as you check and make sure there's a thing called a Catalina smile, where the kill bolts stretch and the kill is kind of gapped from the bottom of the boat, you might have to replace that. But there's a number of options and avenues that you can go down to figure out what kind of boat. Narrow it down to like 5 different types of boats. That's your best bet. And then start looking from there. There's a really good book called like 20 Small Boats to Take You Anywhere that I'll put on the screen right now. And then another book called, I think it's 20 Affordable Boats to Take You Anywhere, which is like the next step up in like what it costs, I would say for like a fully outfitted boat, you're going to be looking at like a blue water boat on the small size, like 30 foot. You're going to be looking at, $35,000, $40,000 when it's all kitted out in the end. I paid $2,400 for Tritea. She was in like had no gear. She was totally stripped and had a seized engine. And I refit her over 4 years. I've invested about $35,000 in that time. And my sponsors have contributed another probably $15,000 in gear. So that kind of tells you, and that's a funny thing, is like, Tritea could not be sold for $50,000. So don't think that what you're contributing dollar for dollar, or what you're investing in the boat, that means that the boat is worth that in the end. That's not how it works. Boats are only worth what you manage to sell them for. And it's usually at far less than what you've invested in them. So if that's how you're thinking about it, you're going to be in for a sad awakening, a sad reality. It's really about picking the right boat that's safe and then outfitted properly for ocean sailing to make sure that you can succeed at your dream. Otherwise, if you try to cut corners, you might find that you've wasted all of your money, and now you're in some far-flung land, the boat is beyond repair, and what do? So you got to think about sort of the long game with it, for sure. It's really important. Just be realistic about it. All right, now I want to talk about 3 things that you don't need on a boat, which are very common. You do not need any of these 3 things. Number 1, a water maker. You do not need a water maker. No one needs a water maker. Sailors sailed for centuries without water makers. I have sailed almost 9,000 miles solo without a water maker, and I've never even bothered with rain catchment, and I've never run out of water. So if you set the boat up properly and you make sure you have water and you get water everywhere you go, especially in the trade winds and stuff, then it's not an issue. Would it be nice to have? Absolutely. But like $5,000 for a water maker is so crazy. Now, if you have a family of 5, I can understand you being like, we need to, you know, make that investment to have a water maker. It makes sense. For a solo sailor, it seems like a huge waste of money that would be better spent like buying a whole new set of sails, or, you know, buying like spares of important things. There is a newly invented water maker coming on the market, I don't know, probably in the next handful of years, from these guys at MIT. They actually I did a long Zoom call with them when I was in Hawaii, and they've figured out how to apply an electrical current to a water maker that desalinates the water. And they're in the testing phases now, and they want me to beta test one, and it doesn't draw a lot of electricity. There are no high pressure pumps, there's no membrane, and it's going to cost less than $2,000 for the retail market. So when that comes online, then it would be a different thing. Like if you could get a water maker, even if it wasn't high output, for under $2,000, then I could see that being like a realistic investment for a boat. But as it stands right now, the complication with the systems, like the membranes alone cost like $500 to replace, and you have to run them constantly. And when you're in a harbor, you can't run them because of petroleum products and because of like foul water and stuff. So you have to pickle them, and every time you pickle them, you're bringing down the lifespan of that membrane. So they're a huge, and not to mention, I don't even know where I would install one. I don't think I have room for all the pieces. So no one needs a water maker. So if you're thinking, well, I can't go cruising until I can manage to get a water maker, that's not a reality. You don't have to do that at all. It's very easy to find water if you're cruising in regular places and cruising throughout the trade winds. Another thing you don't need that is very popular is a sailright machine. I don't know how many boats I've seen with sailright machines, but I tell you, that company has really, I don't know how they managed to do it, but it's like every 3rd boat has a sewing machine on it that almost never gets used. Like the only way I see a boat justifying the expense of a sailright machine is if you plan on doing canvas work in ports to raise money to keep up your savings, or if you plan on doing sail repairs. Because other than like initial like little projects, like if you made your own Dodger, okay, it's cheaper to an extent to do your own Dodger than to have someone make it, because canvas work is expensive. But like if it's a soft Dodger or awnings and stuff. But after that, having this very heavy, very, very expensive sewing machine that is just stowed on the boat for no reason, like, you don't need a sailright machine at all. Again, unless you're going to use it to make money down the road. I even have a friend who was like complaining about the costs of getting a new Dodger made. And I was like, what are you talking about? You have a sailright machine, why don't you make your own? He's like, oh, that's way too complicated. So then you might even run into that situation to where you've like, they're beautiful machines, they're fantastic, I've sewn on them, they're incredible. And I'm sure they're worth the money, but you don't, I mean, how often are you actually going to use it? Especially at sea? I don't think you're going to use it at sea. It would have to be a very specific, very strange thing. Normally you just like make do on repairs at sea, and then when you get to shore, maybe you'd use it, but it's a very unusual thing that is very popular right now, and I don't know why so many boats have them. So you don't need a Sailboat machine. Another thing, you don't need the latest brand new full kitted out B&G system with the 4K radar and everything like that. The big problem with those built-in systems is that the moment you install them, they start becoming outdated. You definitely need a reliable navigation system, and I believe that the built-in chart plotters have a great advantage over using an iPad because they're hardwired in. So it eliminates that sort of thing altogether, as far as like batteries dying and stuff. I have sailed, almost 9,000 miles using an iPad and a little Garmin GPS puck. And it's been awesome. I've gone through a bunch of cords, like the cords, even the salt in the air, the corrosion tends to just destroy those cords kind of in short order, and really only the expensive Apple cords work, and finding those cords in remote places is impossible. So you want to make sure you have a bunch of those in your chart table, so when one starts acting up, you just cut it, throw it away, pull out a new one. But I've just used Navionics, an iPad, and the Garmin Pug. I also have a backup iPad with everything loaded on it, which I check. I log in, make sure everything's up to date before I leave each port. That's important to do because sometimes it will have logged you out or it needs an update, and then your redundancy is no good. So I also have it on my phone, so that's a third backup. And I keep paper charts of every ocean I sail in, so that if I did need to plot and do everything on a paper chart, I could. And I have a sextant, and I keep the up-to-date tables for every year. So I have a bunch of built-in redundancies, but definitely my biggest concern with using an iPad is that battery power charging situation, because I know it's just a matter of time before that thing stops charging, and then what do you do? So you always kind of got to need to keep an eye on that and keep that in mind, because they're not built for this sea environment, and it's amazing how much stuff rusts on this boat that never came in direct contact with salt water. So you don't need to spend $8,000 or who knows, I don't even know what they cost, but on the top of the line B&G everything. A lot of times if you buy a boat and it has an older Ray Marine or even an older B&G or whatever, a lot of times those built-in chart plotters they're going to be a really good, either your full mode of navigation, or if you couple them with Navionics, so that if something happens on your iPad or whatever tablet you use with Navionics, then your backup or whatever, or you're using them in tandem, then that's an option also. I also have OpenCPN on my laptop and a puck that plugs into that GPS plug. So tons of redundancies. The redundancy is the key to all of it. But those are three things that you don't need and that can easily set you back from getting to go cruising, because you think, well, I need to buy a water maker, which is $5,000. I need to buy, all this navigation stuff with radar. And radar is fantastic, but you don't, unless you sail someplace that's very foggy regularly, you don't need radar. I know a lot of cruisers that have really good setups, and they said they'll set alarms so that when they're sailing at night, their radar will alert them to squalls that are approaching, which you can't see at night, and that's really cool. So if you have that, if you have the ability to outfit your boat with a modern system, then that's great. But I just want to stress to people that don't put off cruising by like 3, 5, or 10 years or forever because you think you need all the top of the line stuff, because a lot of times, you could just go and be perfectly fine with a very minimal setup, and get to experience this amazing life without all the bells and whistles. Okay, let's talk about 3 things that I would never put to sea without. The first thing I would never put to sea without is a reliable wind vane steering system. It is so important, especially solo. For a solo sailor, it's your lifeline. And I stress reliable because my first wind vane was an auxiliary rudder wind vane, a Sailboat from the 70s. It was a vintage model. It had a ton of problems. It was also a terrible design, but it's all I could afford. And it did me right to an extent, but it broke down so much that by the time I reached Hawaii, it was almost unusable. And luckily I had my little electronic tiller pilot, which I use when the wind is light or when I use motoring close to shore. You don't even use a wind vane then. So for ocean sailing, like a reliable wind vane, whether I have a hydro vane now, which is the best you can buy on the planet, and it has an auxiliary rudder, and then there's a ton of more affordable versions of different makes that I'm not familiar with. And Monitor, obviously, I'm familiar with, but there's some that are more affordable that are servo pendulum, so they actually use your rudder, and there's lines that connect to your wheel or to your tiller, and use the boat's main rudder as the means of steering. Solo sailing, short-handed sailing, the most important piece of gear on the boat is the wind vane, outside of maybe GPS. It is very important. Also, having an electronic autopilot, whether it's an auto tiller or the kind that hooks to the wheel, crucial gear to have on the boat. The second piece of gear that I would say is very much worth investing money into is new sails. When I left LA, I had extremely old, stretched out, recut sails. I didn't have money for sails. I did with what I could, and it got me there. But when I got to Hawaii, I got new roller Tasker sails, and it was literally like having a brand new boat. I gained a knot and a half of speed with a new main and a new headsail. And I thought, on the test sail, I thought it was a fluke. I was like, this has just got to be, the wind is perfect and there's like small seas. There's no way. There's no way that Tritea now cruises between 5.5 and 6 knots. And now Tritea cruises between 5.5 and 6 knots. And in the trade, she'll do 7 kind of regular. So my old worn out, stretched out sails created extreme weather helm. It was stressful for me when I was hand steering. It was like, you know, made us basically like drag through the water instead of glide through the water. So it's, yeah, I cannot stress enough how important it is to have quality sails on a boat. And they don't have to be brand new for every ocean passage, but if your sails are really worn out, that is the place to put your money, is on new sails. And before sailing with new sails, I thought, well, you know, people back in the olden days, they just had canvas sails and they were terrible and they did all kinds of ocean sailing. So I'm up on them because I have Dacron, even if they're worn out. And while that's true, nowadays you can get affordable sails and get them cut for your boat with a weight that's good for ocean cruising, and it will make your boat a lot faster and make you be able to balance the boat, which takes the stress off the boat, it takes the stress off the crew, and it increases your safety because you're making more miles, which is going to put you into landfall quicker and get you out of the way of storms. So it's really, that's an important place to think about investing your money, is making sure you have really quality sails when you head off. And it's much easier to get those in your home port before you leave than trying to source new sails in Tahiti. You don't want to ship anything in Tahiti. It'll cost you an arm and a leg. So really think about that when it comes to, you know, setting up your boat for long distance cruising. Now, the third thing I would not want to ever leave without, and it's the least of the two. But the third thing that I would not want to have to go to sea without is an Iridium Go with Predict Wind. I think when I'm at sea, I think I pay for the top data package, which is, I don't know what it is. It's like $130 a month or something. 140, I can't remember. But I bought my Iridium Go package from Predict Wind. And the Iridium Go turns your iPhone and your iPad and your computer into a sat phone. And it allows you to download weather like 24 hours a day, as many times as your heart desires. You know, you can download constantly, and it does weather routing. If you decide you want to use you can set it up, and they'll give you suggested routes based on the weather that's ahead of you. I don't ever use weather routing. I've been sailing enough that I know what my boat needs in what conditions and where I want to go. Another cool thing is you have unlimited simple text messages. You can't send photos or get on the internet or anything, but you can send simple text messages under a specific character length. So I have a shore team I communicate with when I'm at sea, and and that helps a lot, especially in an emergency. I found myself in an emergency sailing to Hawaii, and it would have been a very different outcome, more difficult for me, had I not had the option of texting my crew back, my shore team, and getting advice from them where they could look things up in the internet and send me advice. So we have the great benefit of knowing the weather that's coming so that you can prepare. Even if you can't get out of the way, you're going to get hit. You can prepare the boat and be ready for what's coming. And mentally prepare yourself to be like, okay, it's going to be a terrible couple days, and then things are going to be okay. Or, okay, I'm going to be becalmed for 4 days. You know, I can have the spinnaker ready to go in the daylight and stuff. So, Iridium Go and Predict Wind are fantastic. And now, like, Starlink is, like, coming around, which they just kind of hosed people. People were, like, using the Roam package, the RV package at sea, and everybody got hit with emails saying they were going to be charged, like, $2,000 or whatever. Even if I invested in Starlink someday for Tritea, I would never get rid of the Iridium Go. I would never trust Starlink over Iridium Go, ever. So that could be a decent redundancy, but Iridium Go, Predict Wind, like, they will be on my boat as long as I'm sailing. Now, maybe money is not an obstacle for you, and you're like, I'm going to get all the bells and whistles and really, you know, set the boat up top of the line. That's awesome, and it will be great until that stuff starts breaking. Just know that the more you put on a boat, the fancier stuff you get for a boat, all that stuff's going to break at some point. So, is it going to be a situation to where you're so reliant on all the bells and whistles that when it does break, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, are you still going to be able to function as a boat safely now that you're handicapped based on what you're used to sailing with? So that's just something to really keep in mind when you start adding on all the bells and whistles. Another thing I want to touch on real quick is sort of 3 different categories of boat shopping. So you can buy an old boat that has like very minimal gear on it. You could buy a boat that has been recently refit, preferably one that has done some sea miles so that you know that what needs to actually be refit. Or you could buy a factory new boat. Now, as I mentioned, Tritea had like nothing on her, and I had to invest everything. Most importantly, I had the ability to do the labor myself. I already knew how to do a lot of stuff. I learned how to do other stuff. I was comfortable doing all that stuff. So I saved myself a small fortune, a large fortune, doing all the labor myself. Maybe you don't have the option because you have a job or you have family, or you just don't feel comfortable being able to do those sort of repairs or modifications or fabrications on a boat, and you have to hire someone else out. It's going to be very expensive, so keep that in mind in the whole thing. What are you comfortable and capable of doing versus what are you going to have to hire a specialist to do, because those are very different price ranges. I always suggest people look for a boat that is pretty well kitted out, even if some of the kit is like outdated, like maybe the electronic package is a little outdated or something. But if you can find a boat whose rigging has been done, you know, in the last 5 years, that would be awesome. If you could find a boat that has a wind vane on it, you're way up on the game, because those things are very expensive. And, you know, any kind of like gear, sort of offshore gear, it's going to be cheaper for whatever you can get that for, unless they're asking for some completely ridiculous price, which then it's like just walk away from it. But if you can find a boat that is priced within the price range of whatever size boat you're looking at is, like a realistic price range, that already has a bunch of offshore gear, you're going to save a ton of money. Even if it's like an Aries wind vane, like most wind vanes are pretty simple, and a lot of them will work no matter what, you know. So if you can find a boat that has quite a bit of gear, and even sails that aren't that beat up, you know, then you're going to be able to get X number of years out of all that stuff before you have to do your first refit. And I think that's important. Like, I would never suggest someone do like I did and buy a boat that needed everything. I mean, I'm happy I did it the way I did, but I think that in the end, I probably spent more money than had I just bought a boat that was like halfway kitted out already. So that's something important to know. I have a really good friend. Him and his wife bought a brand new, straight from the factory, I think it's a Seawind catamaran. Brand new from the factory. Must have been over $1 million is my guess. And they sailed it from Florida all the way to here. And they had critical failures on that brand new factory made ocean going catamaran the whole season. Like, they were stuck in the Galapagos where there's nothing. And luckily, he is a really handy dude who has like raced the Dakar on a motorcycle, raced across Africa on a motorcycle. He circumnavigated the UK in a Hobie Cat. He's like a small plane pilot, a skydiver. He's a madman. So he has a lot of skills to be able to handle these things. And he was having to build like a gasket for part of their steering system out of resin and toothpicks in the Galapagos just to get them to Raiatea to haul out and get some major repairs done. They had to completely refabricate and have a whole new, different, more robust steering setup on this brand new $1 million catamaran that, you know, was straight from the factory, which is totally insane. And like, they ended up missing so many places, and then they got stuck again in Western Samoa, waiting for more repairs. And again, this is a brand new factory delivered boat. So if you think I'm just going to make the investment, I'm going to sell my house, I'm going to make the investment and buy a brand new boat because then I don't have to fix anything for a decade or longer, that is by no means the reality. And I would say that like a factory brand new boat is more prone to everything breaking, very expensive stuff that has like, you have to have specialists deal with, than buying a boat that has been refit. Specifically one that's in, like buying a boat in Tahiti or here in New Zealand, which would be cheaper I think in Tahiti. But here in New Zealand, it'd be more expensive, but you know that boats that have reached here, that are ocean going boats, that if they have any repairs to be done, that likely that's all that needs to be done, because they're super tough boats and they've put those kind of miles in. And, you know, you have like a really trustworthy platform where there's certain things that always have to be done, but I think that a refit boat that's been tried and true and already put in some miles will give you more peace of mind and less headache and nightmares than, obviously, a brand new boat. I was baffled to learn all that stuff and see all the stuff that they had to do to that boat. And they're still being held up right now, waiting for that Seawind or whatever that company is to send them these replacement parts. They're still waiting. So they might lose this whole cruising season, plus last cruising season, because this boat had so many failures on a brand new boat. So you might think, like buying a new car, where you buy a new car, you're like, well, this thing is not going to break down for a long time, and if it does, then the dealership will deal with it. Well, you can't just like take a boat into a dealership on a remote island in Fiji, or anywhere. There's no dealerships for boats like there are for cars. But so just know that, that's not the sort of solution to this sort of, it's not foolproof by any means at all. And ocean sailing is really hard on the boat. It puts a lot of stress on the boat, and the weakest links will reveal themselves. So those are some things to think about when it comes down to, thinking about old boat, refit boat versus new boat. I hope this has been an informative video and has given you a little insight into the reality of, what you need versus what you want, and some things to think about when it comes down to buying and outfitting a boat. The next episode in this mini-series is going to be about route planning, reading the weather, planning passages, and storm avoidance. And we'll talk about all of those things and more. Thanks for watching. Fair winds until next time. If you enjoy the content on this channel and would like to contribute, you can consider joining the Patreon crew. Thanks for watching. Fair winds until next time.